Hi there, and welcome to this webinar on the voice of the customer. I'm going to start off by taking a quick walk through the couple of topics that we're going to discuss as part of this webinar. So I want to start off looking at the voice of the process and the voice of the customer, picking up on the area of process capability. Then I'll have a look at the quality function deployment methodology. And then we will look at the Kano model and finally move into a little more detail on the voice of the customer in terms of the characteristics and the activities associated with actually going out there and finding out what our customers think. Okay, so to begin, a little chart to remind you of the voice of the process and voice of the customer comparisons that we looked at previously. We specifically looked at the voice of the process through the establishment of the upper and the lower control limits. And then we looked at the spread of that performance against the voice of the customer as identified with the upper and lower spec limits. And essentially the comparison we did through the process capability studies and established our CPKs, our upper and our lower capability indices, which told us the ability essentially of the process to stay within the requirements of the customer. Now, we talked about the customer requirements in that context. So process capability effectively is the range over which the natural variation of a process occurs, and it's determined by the system of common causes. So we don't look to special cause variation in that case. This is just the natural distribution and spread within the process as it runs. It's effectively the ability of the combination of people, machines, methods, materials, and measurements to produce a product or a service that will consistently meet design specifications. So it's measured by the proportion of output that can be produced within design specifications. So in other words, it's a measurement basically of the uniformity of the product. And when we look to try and improve the ratio of process to customer, there are a number of ways that we can effectively improve those indices. We can train employees to improve their own performance, encourage and potentially reward and certainly recognize ideas for process improvement, adjust machinery to the proper settings in its operations, replace worn machinery. We can ensure the quality of the source of the materials is good, or data indeed, and develop a prevention rather than inspection mentality throughout the organization. So lots of different programs and activities that can be undertaken to ensure that our process is improved to the point where it can consistently achieve the customer requirements. However, when we talk about customer requirements, there is obviously a lot more to it than simply identifying the specification limits. Quality deployment. You will be familiar or becoming familiar with that whole concept at present, I'm sure, and that essentially leads to collecting all kinds of the data that we need to be able to generate good product definition at design stage, and then as we go through the house of quality, through developing the processes for production and making those delivery decisions early in the process. So these data are presented in highly visible and compact form. However, it's also important to bear in mind that the starting point for the collection of that data is effectively through the voice of the customer. We begin by asking, what is it the customer is looking for? What are the requirements? Can they be prioritized or ranked? And then we look to see how are we going to satisfy those requirements? What are the technical measurements or indicators or criteria that we need to satisfy or develop or achieve to be able to deliver on those requirements that customers have identified? We look at the interrelationships between those, and also within the design criteria, there are very often trade-offs that have to be made, conflicting technical requirements. So beyond customer priority and market factors, we need to make decisions and potentially trade-offs. We then start also to look at the competition, look at our product and how the customer perceives our offerings relative to those of the competition. Are there particular areas where we're significantly lagging or ahead of the competition? And we can look at things like, are there improvement factors or sales factors that we want to embed in, priorities assigned to our marketing prospects, or the specific features that we think are going to determine, delight customers and potentially attract large chunks of the market. And having done all that, we then start to look at the importance ratings for the various technical deliverables that we've identified, and then we've got to literally go and do the work. We've got to do our technical competitive benchmarking and do the work to develop that we need to satisfy the requirements. The key message here, in terms of the voice of the customer, is that the starting point for this and a point of reference as we go through the process is about the voice of our customer relative to our product and relative to where we sit regarding the competition. So a key element within the area of the voice of the customer is the quality function deployment methodology and a very useful design approach, early engagement with the customers. Another item we want to think about is the Kano model. So the Kano model looks at customer satisfaction relative to the presence of characteristics that we might provide in our products. And we start with the least preferred characteristic, essentially the dissatisfiers. So essentially requirements that are expected in a product or service. So in an automobile, a car, it's going to be radio, heater, require safety features and such like. They're generally not stated by the customer as requirements, but if we don't get them, then we're not going to be happy. So these are the basic assumed as given, if you like, features. And if they're not present, they will cause dissatisfaction. We move beyond dissatisfaction and look at satisfiers. So these are effectively the requirements that we say we want. You know, we may say that we want our sunroof, or we want power windows, or anti-lock brakes, and so on. So getting those, if specified, obviously, is good news. And the more of these features that are packaged in, the more likely we are to be satisfied with the product and with the provider, the customer, the seller, vendor. The next level, I guess, is in terms of the satisfiers move into exciters or delighters. How do we do that? Well, these are really where we have to get innovative. These might be things like having a weather channel button on the radio, or potentially having separate rear seat audio controls for the backseat passengers, the younger generation in many cases, so they can listen to different music, or potentially have different volume controls and such like. So essentially, we need to be innovative. These are the things that really do build customer satisfaction and help make market inroads. However, over time, delighters will fade into satisfiers. The expectation grows over time as word gets around, and more examples are in place. So we need to continue to be innovative and to continue to develop new approaches and new offerings within our products and services to continue to delight the customer as best we can. So an interesting model, quality tool that's been around for quite a long time. The next area I want to talk about is specifically in terms of if we are going to try and get the voice of the customer, how do we go about doing that? What are the approaches, if you like? So essentially, there are three broad categories, if you like, of collecting the voice of the customer. The first one there is the active. So these are surveys, having focus groups, getting out to visit our sites, and potentially in-depth interviews. The next one is the one that we generally, a lot of companies are dealing with, and it's not one that we particularly want to be dealing with. These are customer complaints, product warranty claims, return products. So a lot of the negative activity, receptive. Indirect, again, we get customer-driven measures. Many of us have customers who will specify their requirements and measure it on an ongoing basis and provide us with results of those metrics. And indeed, the fact that we may be securing repeat business is a legitimate way of confirming the voice of the customer. So we have active and proactive and getting out there in positive ways. We have receptive, where we're responding to what comes in. And there's indirect stuff that we're responding to and that we can see effectively. When we think of the voice of the customer activity, it is important to bear in mind that it needs to have an outside-in focus. We need to be looking at it from the perspective of the customer rather than our own perspective on the product we're offering or the service that we think we're delivering. It needs to provide key input into strategic and operational decision making. So this means that it needs to be carefully reflected on. The questions need to be well thought out in terms of doing the exercise, and also that we need to have, it needs to have relevance internally. The information that comes back needs to feed into decision-making processes. Really, really important. It's got to drive that type of process improvements, that the opportunities that will be identified during the voice of the customer activities. One of the other issues, particularly when there are multiple customers in multiple market segments and locations, is putting in place systems and processes to ensure that the information and the data that's coming in from these multiple users can actually be analysed and assessed in a holistic way. So we need processes for engaging with and listening to the customers. The company may not currently have those types of processes in place or have resources allocated to them. Got to have the mechanisms there for effectively collecting that data. So go out and get it, or when do we do it, how frequently? And as I mentioned, the analysis needs to be meaningful. Report needs to be generated to ensure that the issues are understood and the opportunities are presented to the forums, where those opportunities will be seen and embraced. So you need an organizational commitment to address these issues and to deliver added value to current and to potential future customers. Potentially, this is a very, very powerful methodology. Okay, so one of the other things to bear in mind in terms of doing this is, how do we actually do it? So in the activities, effectively there are 4 basic activities that we need to engage in when we are eliciting the voice of the customer, looking to hear what they have to say. The first activity is to plan and to organize those end user visits. A significant amount of planning is actually required to make this process value add, to ensure that we are asking the right questions, that we are asking the right people. When planning those types of visits, we need to think about the following kinds of questions. So what's the purpose of the exercise? Are there specific features or aspects of our business that we're looking to get customer input on? How targeted is it? Who do we need to target as the end users? And even within the end user organizations, are there multiple points that we should be going to? Do we need to talk to both the procurement and the operations people? And maybe even do we need to talk to their marketing or engineering people? Do they all avail of, or do they understand the services and the products that we're inquiring about, that we're trying to find out their views on? What's the best way to interview them? How long a session are we going to get? How do we plan the questions and the sequences? How many end users do we need to go? How many geographies do we need to visit? Do we need to do it personally? Can we do it online? Lots and lots and lots of questions. How big a sample do we need to ensure that we adequately represent that population? How do we conduct the interview? Lots and lots, as I said, lots of questions that need to be answered. Lots of thinking and planning, which ultimately will impact the quality of the voice of the customer activity. The second one is to actually go and do the interviews, prepare properly for them, ensure that the meetings are set up, people are aware of what's coming, that the structure of the interviews has been planned, and then literally just go and get them done, do the business. Having completed the interviews, it's obviously essential that the interviews are recorded, either documented or audio recorded, and that they're analysed, that the relevant data and information is extracted from them, and that any findings, useful guidelines, problems, and so on are all extracted, identified, and that they're organised and ranked effectively. And then the report needs to be generated. The results need to get in front of the right people, which is the final piece, planning the actions. We need to get to the decision makers, make sure that persuasive cases are made and that appropriate actions are developed and implemented. Otherwise, the activity is essentially wasteful and can be quite heavy on resources. So the voice of the customer is a significant strategic piece in how we improve our processes. It provides a very valuable input as well as an important test ground indeed. So that concludes my webinar on the voice of the customer. Thank you very much for watching, and if you do have any questions or would like to comment on it, you can get back to me on jim@leanjimcollins.ie. Thank you for watching.